I've gone from grind to grind since Modern Warfare 2 dropped, from ranking up every weapon to Orion camo to some Warzone 2 grinding. About the only thing that I haven't done there yet is the Nuke contract, just because my squad isn't really interested as much as I am in it. But now moving on to the next grind, playing catch up, is DMZ. And I get it, it's not for everybody, it's not everyone's cup of tea. Some people might not find it too enjoyable. Me as a completionist, liking to try and complete everything that I can, I'm enjoying the challenge here at hand to complete all those faction challenges and everything. But with so little by comparison for MP content being released, it's something for me to do and keep busy with and make some content on. But throughout hours and hours and hours of game time, I wanted to detail some of my hopes here for the long-term future of DMZ. And as we've talked about before, DMZ right now is rumored to be a sort of light format right now, evolving over time as evidenced by the beta branding of the mode. So how can we improve that? How can we maybe see this expand over the next year, maybe two? Today I wanted to pitch my ideas, and if there's any chance of these making it out there, figured why not. So let me know as we go along, what do you think of these ideas? Is there anything you'd like to add to it? But for now, let's jump into what I'd like to see. First and foremost, one thing that I think that is a little more trivial, but I think would be really cool for the gameplay experience is weather variation on two different levels there. Firstly, a night and day time rotation, either intermittently active or the ability to queue for one or the other. I don't quite think that we'll end up getting a sort of 24-hour adaptation of the world of Al Mazrah where you actually see sunsets and everything like that, but I think it'd be cool to auto cycle through, like 1 week you have a daytime variation, another you have a nighttime variation, or you can queue into it. Though I don't expect them to actually make it queuable. I mean, they don't want to introduce solos, duos, and quads for the reason of breaking up the player base, so I don't imagine they would do that, but it'd be cool to see, and it would introduce new utility items or the potential for it, like things like NVGs. Random weather is one thing, though, that I think can make gameplay very interesting, where we talked about how that's a goal for Infinity Ward, but it's also not something that's very close. So while DMZ looks to be supported just as long as Warzone 2, it's possible in a year 2 update, maybe we get a sandstorm that will roll in or something like that, but it comes down to functionality. Can they get enough bandwidth to do that in-game? The big focal point with bandwidth so far has been water, something that is surprisingly really tough to navigate and run from a developmental standpoint. But another big thing, and more so less trivial, one thing that I really think can help out the gameplay experience is a Reconnect feature for DMZ. Crashing is still relatively frequent from posts that I see. In fact, even me, I've actually switched back to an old PC now because I think I have some issues with my RAM in my new PC build, where every time I try to boot the game, it would either crash on startup, or maybe I'd get into a game and then DC like at most 5 minutes into it. So whether it's something that's hardware related on my end or something that maybe you just have where it's a game issue, connectivity and straight up dev errors absolutely still persist. So queuing in and then losing potentially days worth of work to upgrade your armory, that's one of the worst feelings. When it's something that isn't a backing out of the game, the ability to reconnect I think would be absolutely golden. So fingers crossed we get that kind of thing as well. Similarly, if a player leaves, their loot shouldn't despawn immediately. I've had this happen tons of times for myself, and I've seen it as well, where if you down a player, you end up killing them. I know there's tons of the game that PvP isn't always what you're looking for, but it does inevitably happen sometimes. So if somebody is downed and they leave, their loot just immediately will despawn. Whether you're trying to salvage higher level loot off an enemy, or you just have things like some challenges require killing enemy operators, it becomes inaccessible, and I trust this will be fixed in time, just like how loot and kill credit weren't initially awarded for players that backed out in Warzone 1, but for the time being, that's just something that almost as a formality I think that I have to mention for a future wish list. But before we continue on, if you find any of this at all insightful, you agree with the ideas proposed, or you just want to see more content on Modern Warfare 2, Warzone 2, and DMZ, do me a favor, drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel to stay on top of all of it. But back to it. Next, let's talk about what is probably the most touched on topic we've discussed, but this time I really sat down and thought out what I'd rather see rather than just saying, oh, I'd like to see a marketplace in DMZ like we've done before. I think there's some really big potential in what we could see with it. So at its base, I'd love to see DMZ over time add a vendor, trader, or shop system in place where you could get a number of different things. From a cosmetic sense, you could maybe buy camos, blueprints, charms, and so on and so forth. But not only offer just that, offer in-game utility, but purchasable out of game. Make regaining a little bit more accessible, but not maybe to the degree where you can end up getting everything and be fully set up once again, because at that point, you kind of lose out on the aspect of looting up and trying to find things in-game. But maybe say buy things like large backpacks at a premium, $40,000 to $50,000 or more instead of the in-game $30,000, but you're deploying in with that instead of having to loot and grab it in-game. Buy utility items like gas masks. Again, maybe not durables, just adding some value to looting in-game as a reward. UAVs or other baseline streaks, again, maybe not an advanced UAV for premiums once again. Buy, at the very least, a tier 2 armor vest. I get it, you want to loot again still and maybe make tier 3 a little bit more valuable, but going in with one plate is such a massive disadvantage, and that's coming from somebody who's done it many times, played and lost their gear a lot. I also think buying higher level keys at a very high price would be awesome as well, adding a sort of level to jump in and complete contract areas, but at a higher price tag to sort of skip the line per se in terms of just trying to hopelessly loot, or for things like building 21. The one challenge that I've had recently is I have to access the crane control room in Quarry, and I have looted so much to try and find that key, and it's just almost dang near impossible. So if I could maybe buy one for, I don't know, an excess of $40,000 or something like that, I'd absolutely do it so that I could get that contract done. Another thing that I think would be really cool is purchasable perks. I mean, we see the success of the exfil perk bonuses, which honestly, I love that system. It's the only way to get perks in DMZ right now, but they can be such a help. Maybe you're offering like base perks and you can buy upwards of 2 for, again, rather high premiums that still act the same way, but when you die, you lose them. So it's a massive help deploying, but it's a high risk, high reward if you lose them. And I mean base perks like those ones out of your perk packages where it's the first 2, not the bonus or the ultimate perks, so that you don't have the ability to buy things immediately like ghosts or something like that. But I think all of that kind of stuff, I think it just gives value to looting and extracting with more cash. Granted, yes, you do end up having the ability to exfil with that, and then it cuts into your time on the cooldown for your insured weapon slots, but beyond that, there really is no reason to exfil with any cash. So to be able to take that and then incentivize looting, incentivize more contracts and everything like that, that encourages players to interact with more of the world items, I think that'd be a great step forward. Now, beyond that, I'd also like to see some stash upgrades and/or inventories for player stash items. Now, firstly, what I mean by the existing stash upgrades, I'd like to see either an expansion or a decrease, but split in the inventory system we have right now, where you only have the ability to carry 20 contraband weapons in your overall inventory. I'd like to either see an increase by 5, 10, 15 or more contraband slots, or just separate the stashes into 2 different splits, a player stash and a contraband weapon stash, because you can pick up weapons off of operators, true weapons that were created and aren't just things that are contraband weapons that are kind of baseline weapons. Maybe make a stash of like 10 of those and then 10 contraband weapons as well, limiting the number of what you can have, but breaking them up into more refined categories, if that makes sense. And then also, I'd like to see a player inventory stash as well, because there are plenty of miscellaneous items that you don't want to burn at the end of each deployment that can go back into storage for your operator if we had this. High-end things like GPUs, gold skulls, radioactive materials, and so on that make things long-term for some of those bigger contract items and faction missions a little bit more obtainable and giving a little head start on things, as opposed to when you come across having to find so many gold skulls or GPUs, because those are very few and far in between. Moving on, one additional thing that I'm kind of on the fence with is time extensions. That's one thing that I've thought about recently, because 25 minutes is a lot of time when you think about it before that final radiation starts to spread. But honestly, you've also had plenty of times where that 25 minutes breezes by and I'm just like, oh man, I thought I had more time to complete some of these missions. So I'd be curious to see if that ever does get increased. If it does, cool. If it doesn't, again, I'm just as fine with it either way. But that's one thing that I've thought about recently, where I'm trying to complete maybe all 3 missions that I have up on deck. Right now, getting into the higher tiers, you can't quite do all 3 in one single game, but you get the point. One of the other big things that I would really love to see is additional grinds of some sort. This is where I think there's a lot of creative freedom, and where my own pitches may mean less than others in terms of the weight and what I hope to see, because some of these I think they'd be really cool, but I don't know if they'd actually come. I love the ideas behind the weapon cases, and I really think that they're done well. A rare item set to collect in maps on offer, where you're marked the entire way as you fight to exfil. I love that. It gives some meaning and value to the end game reward that you pick up and end up achieving by that match. I'd love to see more things like this, but this again is more open-ended, and it's just kind of cool ideas I had. I doubt that these will make it in, but for me, I'd love to see similar contracts, maybe firstly to like the Champions Quest contract in regard to something that has an absurd reward at the end, maybe not like nuking the DMZ, but an ultra rare blueprint or something that would mark you for the entire game of DMZ and send the entire map after you. This could be easier or harder depending, given that there's only 66 people in DMZ and Al Mazrah, 12 in Building 21, but that really wouldn't work in Building 21. But that's less than the 150 of Battle Royale that marks you on the entire map, so who knows? But I think that it'd be cool to see the entire lobby after you, and you'd have to survive that entire time. Stressful and challenging, but pretty cool. Additionally, I'd like to see other Easter egg quests as well, similar to Bunker 11 and Verdansk or some of the other Easter eggs we saw within Warzone 1. With how much we've already seen them lean into the nuclear side of Warzone with the Champions Quest contract, and how much they want DMZ to be an open world experience, there's ample opportunity to do something cool with quest lines and storylines. For reference and those unaware, the Verdansk Bunker 11 Easter egg was one of the first of its kind. A few followed before they stopped doing them, but you had to locate activation phones and numbered phones all across Verdansk. The task was to activate one of the activation phones, listen to the corresponding message, which was a number sequence listed in Russian, so a lot of people learned some basic Russian in mid-2020. Then you had to go in and activate those phones in each match corresponding with a number in that sequence and in order, otherwise you'd have to restart the entire thing. You did it out of order, again, just got it wrong, you'd have to restart. Now, the catch was that you couldn't just memorize that sequence, because that phone sequence changed every single game, so you had to commit to it. And once you hit the phones in that sequence order, you'd be able to fly out to a remote area on the hillsides of the northwestern portion of Verdansk and find Bunker 11, where, if done properly, instead of the red light above the bunker, it would be a green light where you could then enter in, get a ton of loot, get Easter egg items, learn about the upcoming storyline with a nuke hidden away that Zakayev was planning on using later on in the seasons, and for a reward you ended up getting the Mudrobber MP7 blueprint. With how much open world DMZ is trying to be, with how much time there is per match, it'd be the perfect opportunity, I think, to incorporate more world-sized quest lines with multiple steps like this, rather than just killing an HVT, boss, or extracting with a weapon case. I would love to see those kind of things return, but that's just me selfishly wanting more things to grind out. And finally, off the top of my head here that I can think of, and so as we don't go too far into time, additional factions and challenge sets are also something that I'd love to see. While it's possible that wipes could happen, I'm not expecting one to happen for some time. Seasonal wipes seems like too short of a time for casual players who may want to complete everything. Gotta figure that some of these challenges in DMZ get really tedious and are predicated on time played and sheer RNG of the looting aspects and other areas, but also other people may be really far along in it, if not completed with a lot of, if not all of their challenges for all three factions by now. So you have to find that balance of offering more to the hardcore players while also not punishing the more casual players that don't have the time or maybe say interest to complete everything this quickly. The way that I see it happening is perhaps seasonally adding maybe either a faction entirely or another tier or two of faction challenges for existing factions, maybe both. Perhaps we see one season added in, we get 2 tiers added per faction, 6 to 7 total tiers added across the existing factions, but then every other season maybe we end up getting a new faction entirely, either with that full then 6 to 7 tiers or so, or just the baselines of the 5 tiers again, with prerequisites that you have to complete other faction missions, like you did with the Black Mouse and other things like that. So I think you could do that and add in way more replayability as well, adding more challenges in as we go along, and fingers crossed that's something that does happen, because I think that could prolong the lifespan of the game as well. But right now, that's some of the big pitches that I have here, some things that I think that DMZ really needs, and in terms of overall functionality, not only just from a reconnecting standpoint and making sure you don't lose your stuff, but also to keeping the game fresh, to keeping it something that players will want to jump in and continue playing. So for that, I think that's what we're going to call it. I'd love to get your thoughts and feedback down below. What do you guys think of this here? Do you think these are good pitches for DMZ's future? Do you think we'll see something glaring that I entirely forgot to mention? Whatever the case, drop your thoughts below. But if you enjoyed the video, you found it at all insightful, do me a favor and drop a like on it. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a single thing regarding all things Modern Warfare 2, Warzone 2, and DMZ. But for now, thanks so much for watching. Mine has been Espresso. I'll see you guys later. Take care, and peace.